The morning I discovered that someone had built an entire neighborhood on my boss's private property, I thought I was losing my mind. Standing on the hilltop overlooking what should have been pristine California wilderness, I stared down at 98 brand-new luxury homes, complete with manicured lawns, swimming pools, and a woman in a white tennis outfit directing landscaping crews like she owned the place. My name is Oliver Reed, and I'm the property manager for global pop superstar Dua Lipa. You know her from chart-topping hits like Levitating and Don't Start Now. But what you probably don't know is that she owns 847 acres of pristine California hillside that she purchased as a private retreat and investment property. The land sits in Marin County, just north of San Francisco, where rolling hills meet ancient redwood groves and the Pacific Ocean stretches to the horizon. Dua had bought the property 3 years ago for $12.8 million, attracted by its complete privacy and stunning natural beauty. The plan was simple: preserve the wilderness character while building a small, eco-friendly recording studio where she could write music surrounded by nature. She'd specifically chosen undeveloped land to avoid the kind of neighborhood drama that follows celebrities everywhere they go. The property deed was crystal clear. Dua Lipa owned every square inch of the 847 acres, from the coastal redwoods down to the creek bed that formed the natural boundary with the adjacent Hillcrest Estates development. We had surveys, title insurance, and environmental assessments that confirmed the boundaries down to the foot. So imagine my shock when I drove up for our monthly property inspection and found a fully developed subdivision where there should have been nothing but oak trees and hiking trails. The first thing I noticed was the gate. Someone had installed a massive stone entrance with brass lettering reading Hillcrest Meadows Estates directly across what had been our private access road. Security cameras monitored the entrance, and a guardhouse sat where Dua's wilderness trail had started just 6 months ago. I parked outside the gate and walked the perimeter, my mind racing as I tried to understand what I was seeing. The development was extensive and obviously expensive. Mediterranean-style mansions with red tile roofs dotted the hillside, each sitting on carefully graded lots with professional landscaping and circular driveways. The infrastructure was complete: paved roads with decorative streetlights, underground utilities, and a community center that looked like it belonged at a country club. But the crown jewel of this unauthorized development was the woman coordinating the final construction details. She stood in the center of it all, wearing a pristine white athletic bralette and matching tennis skirt, her platinum blonde hair pulled back in a power ponytail that caught the morning California sun. She moved between construction crews and landscaping teams with the confidence of someone who owned every inch of ground beneath her feet. I approached cautiously, still trying to process the magnitude of what I was seeing. The woman noticed me immediately, her ice blue eyes assessing me with the kind of calculation that suggested she was used to challenges to her authority. "Excuse me," I called out. "I think there's been some mistake. This is private property." She turned toward me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, clutching a leather-bound clipboard like a weapon. "I'm sorry. Who are you?" "Oliver Reed, property manager for the landowner. This entire area is private property, and you're trespassing." The woman's laugh was sharp and dismissive. "Honey, I think you're confused. This is Hillcrest Meadows Estates, a luxury planned community. I'm Karen Whitmore, HOA President and Development Coordinator. We have all the proper permits and approvals." She gestured toward the sprawling development behind her with obvious pride. "These homes represent $240 million in property value. We didn't just build here randomly. We have surveys, environmental clearances, and county approvals for every single structure." I pulled out my phone and showed her the GPS coordinates that marked Dua's property boundaries. "According to our surveys, you've built this entire development on land owned by Dua Lipa. Every house, every road, every utility line is sitting on private property that was purchased 3 years ago." Karen's expression shifted from dismissive to predatory. "Dua Lipa? The pop singer?" She looked me up and down like I was a particularly amusing insect. "Sweetie, celebrities buy property all the time and forget about it. They certainly don't understand complex real estate law or development rights." She opened her clipboard and showed me official-looking documents covered in stamps and signatures. "These are county-approved development plans, filed 2 years ago. Environmental impact assessments, infrastructure permits, every single approval required for a development of this scope." The papers looked legitimate, but something was fundamentally wrong. Dua's property had been surveyed and titled just 3 years ago. There was no way a major development could have been approved and constructed without her knowledge, especially not on land she owned outright. "I need to make some phone calls," I said, backing toward my car while trying to process the implications of what Karen was claiming. "You do that," Karen called after me, her voice carrying the kind of confidence that comes from believing you've outsmarted everyone around you. "But I suggest you tell your boss that property ownership is more complicated than buying land and forgetting about it. We have 98 families who've invested their life savings in homes that are 100% legal and properly permitted." I drove back to Dua's Malibu house in a state of shock, my mind racing through possible explanations for what I'd witnessed. Could there have been a surveying error, a title dispute we'd missed, some kind of legal loophole that allowed development on private land? By the time I reached Dua's house, I'd called our real estate attorney, our title insurance company, and the county planning office. The conversations were confusing and contradictory. The county confirmed that development permits had been issued for Hillcrest Meadows Estates, but they couldn't immediately verify the property boundaries. The title insurance company insisted our ownership was clear and unambiguous. Our attorney scheduled an emergency meeting for the following morning. Dua was in her home studio when I arrived, working on vocals for her next album. The soundproofed room was filled with the kind of technical equipment that had helped create her biggest hits, but she looked up immediately when she saw my expression. "Oliver, you look like you've seen a ghost. What happened at the property?" I sat down heavily in one of the studio chairs, still trying to find words for what I'd discovered. "Dua, someone has built an entire neighborhood on your land, 98 luxury homes, complete infrastructure, and an HOA president who claims they have legal right to be there." Dua's eyes widened in disbelief. "What do you mean, built on my land? How is that possible?" I showed her the photos I'd taken on my phone, the gate, the homes, the woman in tennis whites directing construction crews. "This Karen Whitmore person claims they have county permits and development approvals. She says you're just a celebrity who bought property and forgot about it." Dua's expression transformed from confusion to the kind of focused intensity that had made her one of the world's biggest pop stars. "Oliver, I paid nearly $13 million for that property specifically because it was undeveloped wilderness. I have every survey, every title document, every piece of paperwork that proves I own those 847 acres. She stood up and started pacing the studio, her mind clearly racing through the implications. Who is this woman? How did she get permits to develop land she doesn't own? And how did she manage to build 98 houses without anyone noticing? Those were exactly the questions that had been consuming me during the drive back from Marin County. I don't know yet, but something is seriously wrong. Either someone made a massive legal error, or we're looking at systematic fraud on a scale I've never seen before. Dua stopped pacing and looked directly at me with the kind of determination that had carried her from London pub singer to global superstar. "Oliver, I want you to hire the best real estate attorney in California. I want private investigators. I want surveys, title searches, and background checks on this Karen woman and everyone involved in this development." She gestured toward the window that overlooked her perfectly maintained Malibu property. "I've worked too hard and invested too much to let someone steal my property through bureaucratic fraud. If this woman thinks she can build a neighborhood on my land and intimidate me into accepting it, she's about to learn what happens when you mess with someone who's fought for everything she's achieved." The next morning brought our first breakthrough. Margaret Stevens, Dua's real estate attorney, had spent the night reviewing county records and discovered the first smoking gun in what was obviously a carefully orchestrated fraud scheme. "Dua, Oliver, what we're looking at is sophisticated criminal fraud disguised as legitimate development," Margaret announced during our emergency meeting in her downtown San Francisco office. "Someone has systematically falsified property boundaries, forged environmental assessments, and corrupted county approval processes to authorize development on land they don't own." She spread the evidence across her conference table like a prosecutor preparing for trial. "The development permits for Hillcrest Meadows Estates are based on property surveys that place your land boundaries 3 miles east of their actual location. According to these fraudulent documents, your 847 acres don't exist. The manipulated surveys were works of criminal art. Someone had used sophisticated mapping software to redraw property lines, eliminate geographical landmarks, and create fictional boundaries that justified developing Dua's private property as unclaimed land suitable for residential construction. But here's where they made their first mistake," Margaret continued, pointing to satellite photographs that showed the development timeline. "County records show this project was approved and permitted 16 months ago. But satellite imagery proves construction began 3 months before Dua purchased the property. The timeline was impossible and obviously fraudulent. According to the county documents, environmental assessments had been completed and construction permits issued for property that was still owned by the previous landowner, who'd never applied for development approval or authorized any construction. Someone knew Dua was buying this property and began preparing the fraud before the sale was even completed, Margaret explained. This wasn't opportunistic development, it was a planned theft designed to steal property from a high-profile buyer who might not notice construction happening on remote wilderness land. The private investigator we'd hired provided additional context that made the scheme even more disturbing. Karen Whitmore had a history of questionable real estate dealings across 3 states, always involving celebrities or wealthy individuals who owned large properties they didn't visit frequently. She's done this before, the investigator reported. Smaller scale, but the same pattern. Identify wealthy property owners who travel frequently or own investment land they don't actively monitor. Create fraudulent permits and development approvals. Build high-value improvements that create legal complications when the real owners finally discover the unauthorized construction. But the Dua Lipa case represented an escalation in both scope and audacity. 98 luxury homes representing $240 million in construction value wasn't just fraud, it was criminal enterprise operating at the scale of organized crime. The families who bought these homes, I asked, are they victims or accomplices? Margaret's expression was grim. Most are probably innocent buyers who believed they were purchasing legally constructed homes in a legitimate development, but some of the early investors and the sales team had to know the property ownership was questionable. The real estate agency handling sales for Hillcrest Meadows Estates was owned by Karen's brother-in-law. The construction company was a subsidiary of her husband's development firm. The environmental consultants who'd provided fraudulent assessments were frequent contractors for projects managed by Karen's extended family. We're looking at a criminal conspiracy involving at least 12 people and 6 companies, Margaret concluded. They've stolen your property, built unauthorized improvements worth hundreds of millions of dollars, and sold homes to innocent families using fraudulent permits and manipulated surveys. Dua's response was immediate and decisive. File criminal complaints with every relevant agency, FBI, state prosecutors, county fraud investigators. I want these people prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. She paused, her voice carrying the steel that had made her one of the music industry's most successful artists. And I want injunctions stopping all sales and construction immediately. Every family who bought homes on my stolen property needs to understand that their contracts are void and their ownership claims are fraudulent. But Margaret warned us that the legal battle would be complex and potentially devastating for innocent homeowners. Dua, you have clear legal ownership of the property, but 98 families have invested their life savings in homes they believed were legitimate purchases. This case will generate massive media attention and potentially sympathetic coverage for families who thought they were buying their dream homes. The irony wasn't lost on any of us. Dua's celebrity status, which had made her a target for this elaborate fraud, would also make the legal battle a public relations nightmare. Karen and her conspirators had calculated that a pop star fighting to evict families from homes they'd purchased in good faith would face enormous public pressure to settle rather than pursue criminal prosecution. Let me worry about the media coverage, Dua said with the confidence of someone who'd navigated global stardom while maintaining artistic integrity. My job is to make music and protect the property I've legally purchased. Karen Whitmore's job was apparently to steal land and commit fraud. We'll see which one of us is better at our job. The next phase of the investigation would determine whether we were dealing with isolated fraud or systematic criminal enterprise. But one thing was already clear. The woman in the white tennis outfit who dismissed me as a confused property manager had made the catastrophic mistake of stealing from someone with the resources, determination, and public platform to fight back. The battle for Dua's property was about to begin, and Karen Whitmore had no idea what she'd unleashed. The morning we filed federal criminal complaints against Karen Whitmore and her conspiracy, I watched Dua prepare for what would become the most expensive property battle in California history. Standing in Margaret Stevens' law office overlooking San Francisco Bay, Dua reviewed evidence that transformed a property dispute into a federal racketeering case worth over $240 million. Margaret had spent 3 weeks assembling a case that read like organized crime prosecution. Dua, we're not just dealing with unauthorized construction, we're looking at systematic fraud involving falsified surveys, corrupted county officials, and a criminal network that has operated across multiple states for over 5 years. The evidence spread across the conference table painted a picture of sophisticated criminal enterprise. Karen Whitmore hadn't just stolen Dua's property, she'd built an entire fraudulent development industry that targeted wealthy landowners who didn't actively monitor their investments. The county planning director who approved these permits received $85,000 in consulting fees from Karen's husband's development company, Margaret explained, pointing to bank records that showed systematic bribery. The environmental consultant who signed off on fictional impact assessments is Karen's sister. The surveyor who redrew your property boundaries is a longtime family friend who's falsified documents in 3 previous cases. But the smoking gun that would destroy Karen's entire operation came from her own communications. Federal investigators had obtained search warrants for her emails, text messages, and financial records that revealed the true scope of her criminal enterprise. She's been planning this specific fraud for 2 years, Margaret continued, showing us printed emails that documented the conspiracy in Karen's own words. They researched Dua's travel schedule, her property management arrangements, and the remote location of the land specifically to ensure the construction would proceed undetected. One email to her husband was particularly damaging. The pop star bought 847 acres and doesn't even visit. Perfect target for Phase 3 expansion. County permits approved using modified surveys. Construction begins Monday. By the time she discovers it, we'll have sold 60 homes and she'll be facing a public relations nightmare trying to evict innocent families. Dua read the email with the focused intensity that had made her one of the world's biggest stars. They specifically targeted me because I'm a celebrity who travels frequently. They calculated that I wouldn't discover the theft until it was too late to stop without massive negative publicity. The financial analysis was equally devastating. Karen's criminal network had generated over $47 million in profits from previous property theft schemes involving celebrities, tech executives, and wealthy retirees who owned large properties they visited infrequently. She's stolen portions of properties belonging to 3 Hollywood actors, 2 Silicon Valley entrepreneurs, and a retired NFL player, the private investigator reported. Always the same pattern: identify absentee owners, corrupt local officials, build unauthorized improvements, then sell to innocent buyers who create legal complications when the real owners discover the theft. But the Dua Lipa case represented Karen's most ambitious fraud attempt. The scale of construction and the value of stolen property had crossed the threshold into federal racketeering territory that carried potential life imprisonment. Federal prosecutors were eager to make an example of systematic property theft targeting high-profile victims. The FBI had assigned a task force specifically to investigate what they termed celebrity property fraud, a growing criminal trend that exploited the travel schedules and investment patterns of wealthy individuals. The media attention surrounding this case will send a message to other criminals considering similar schemes, FBI agent Sarah Chen explained during our briefing. Karen Whitmore made the mistake of stealing from someone with the platform and resources to expose systematic fraud that has victimized dozens of property owners across the country. But Karen wasn't finished with her fraudulent schemes. Even while federal investigators were building their case, she continued selling homes to innocent families using forged documents and manipulated property records. The sales office for Hillcrest Meadows Estates operated like a legitimate real estate operation, complete with professional marketing materials, model homes, and sales staff who appeared genuinely convinced they were selling legal properties. Karen had created such sophisticated documentation that even experienced real estate attorneys were initially fooled by the fraudulent permits and surveys. She's sold 18 additional homes since you discovered the unauthorized construction, Margaret reported during our weekly strategy meeting. Each sale creates another family that will face financial devastation when the property is returned to your ownership. The innocent homeowners were becoming unwitting accomplices in Karen's scheme. Families who'd invested their life savings in dream homes were now legally trespassing on Dua's private property, creating the exact public relations nightmare Karen had calculated would force a settlement rather than criminal prosecution. Local media coverage initially focused on the families facing eviction rather than the criminal fraud that had created their situation. Dua Lipa demands families leave dream homes ran as a headline in the Marin County Register, accompanied by photos of children playing in yards that technically belonged to a global pop star. But Dua's response demonstrated the strategic thinking that had built her career from London clubs to worldwide stadiums. Instead of hiding from the negative coverage, she scheduled a press conference to explain the criminal conspiracy and her commitment to protecting innocent families from further victimization. I understand that families believe they were making legitimate purchases, Dua said, addressing packed media at Margaret's office. But the solution isn't ignoring criminal fraud, it's prosecuting the criminals and protecting future victims from similar schemes. She announced the establishment of a legal defense fund to help affected families pursue claims against Karen's criminal network for fraud, misrepresentation, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. The families living on my stolen property aren't my enemies. They're victims of the same criminal enterprise that stole my land. The press conference transformed public perception overnight. Instead of a wealthy celebrity evicting innocent families, the story became systematic criminal fraud, targeting both property owners and homebuyers through sophisticated document falsification and government corruption. But Karen's response revealed the true depth of her criminal arrogance. Rather than attempting to negotiate or apologize, she doubled down with a media campaign that would ultimately provide prosecutors with additional evidence of her systematic fraud. Dua Lipa is using her celebrity status to bully legitimate homeowners, Karen announced during her own press conference, standing in front of the unauthorized development wearing her signature white tennis outfit and gripping her clipboard like a weapon. These families invested their life savings in properly permitted homes. We have every legal document required for legitimate development. She displayed the fraudulent surveys and forged permits with the confidence of someone who believed her falsified documents could withstand legal scrutiny. Miss Lipa can hire expensive attorneys and private investigators, but she can't change the fact that Hillcrest Meadows Estates is a legal development with proper county approvals. The press conference was a prosecutor's dream. Karen had publicly claimed ownership of property she'd stolen, displayed fraudulent documents as legitimate evidence, and accused the real property owner of harassment for attempting to protect her legal rights. She just confessed to property theft on live television, Margaret observed while watching news coverage of Karen's disastrous media appearance. Everything she displayed as evidence of legitimacy is actually proof of systematic document fraud. Federal investigators immediately subpoenaed the documents Karen had presented during her press conference. Laboratory analysis revealed sophisticated forgery involving multiple government seals, falsified signatures, and manipulated property surveys that had been altered using professional graphics software. But the most damaging evidence came from Karen's own social media presence. Her Facebook and Instagram accounts documented the development construction timeline with photos and comments that proved she knew the property ownership was disputed. "Building our dream community despite legal challenges from absentee owners," read one Facebook post accompanied by photos of construction crews working on Dua's stolen land. "Some people buy property and forget about it. We're creating homes where families can build memories." The social media evidence established criminal intent and knowledge of wrongdoing that would support federal conspiracy charges. Karen had documented her own crimes while simultaneously creating a public record of her arrogant dismissal of legitimate property rights. Meanwhile, the financial investigation revealed the true scope of Karen's criminal enterprise. She'd established a network of shell companies, fake consulting firms, and fraudulent contractors that had systematically drained money from both property theft schemes and legitimate HOA communities she'd managed. She's stolen over $3.2 million from HOA reserve funds across 6 different communities, Agent Chen reported. The property theft was just one component of a much larger criminal operation involving embezzlement, fraud, and systematic abuse of community management authority. The additional criminal charges transformed Karen's case from property theft to organized racketeering that carried mandatory minimum sentences under federal guidelines. She would face life imprisonment without the possibility of parole if convicted on all charges. But perhaps most satisfying was the collapse of her carefully constructed public image. The woman who'd ruled multiple HOA communities through intimidation and bureaucratic warfare was now facing federal prosecution for systematic criminal fraud. Property values in the legitimate Hillcrest Estates community plummeted as news coverage revealed their HOA president was a federal criminal defendant. Residents who'd supported Karen's authoritarian management style discovered their community funds had been systematically stolen to finance unauthorized construction on stolen property. The irony was perfect. Karen's attempt to steal Dua's property and profit from unauthorized development had instead exposed her entire criminal enterprise and destroyed the legitimate communities she'd spent years controlling. 2 months after filing federal charges, we received the news that would guarantee Karen's conviction and complete destruction. Federal investigators had traced her criminal network to property theft schemes in 12 states involving over $15 million in stolen land and fraudulent development. "She's going to federal prison for the rest of her life," Margaret announced during our final strategy meeting. "The evidence is overwhelming, the financial damages are staggering, and the federal prosecutors are treating this as organized crime rather than simple property theft." Dua's response was characteristically gracious and forward-thinking. "I'm grateful that justice is being served, but I'm more interested in protecting future victims and helping the families recover from this fraud." She announced that the legal defense fund for affected families had grown to $2.3 million through donations from supporters who recognized the importance of fighting systematic criminal fraud. Every family who'd purchased homes on her stolen property would receive assistance pursuing full restitution from Karen's criminal network. But the most beautiful outcome was the transformation of Dua's stolen property into something positive and community-oriented. Rather than simply demolishing the unauthorized houses, she announced plans to purchase them from the innocent families at fair market value and convert the development into affordable housing for working families in Marin County. These homes exist because of criminal fraud, but they're still homes where families have created memories, Dua explained. Instead of destruction, we can create something positive that serves the community while ensuring no one profits from criminal behavior. The plan was both financially sound and socially responsible. Dua would acquire clear title to all properties, compensate innocent buyers for their losses, and create affordable housing community that addressed Marin County's chronic shortage of workforce housing. Karen's attempt to steal property for luxury development had instead created an opportunity for community service that would benefit working families for generations. The criminal fraud that was supposed to enrich her network would instead fund affordable housing and legal protections for future property theft victims. The woman in the white tennis outfit who dismissed me as a confused property manager had made the catastrophic mistake of stealing from someone with the vision, resources, and determination to transform criminal fraud into community benefit. Justice wasn't just being served, it was being leveraged for social good that would outlast any prison sentence. 6 months after federal prosecutors filed RICO charges against Karen Whitmore, I found myself coordinating with FBI agents who transformed the unauthorized Hillcrest Meadows development into the epicenter of the largest property fraud investigation in California history. The woman in the white tennis outfit who dismissed me as a confused property manager was now the target of a federal task force that had uncovered systematic criminal enterprise spanning 14 states. Agent Sarah Chen had established a command center in the community clubhouse that Karen had built using Dua's stolen property. The irony was perfect. Federal investigators were using Karen's own fraudulent construction to coordinate her prosecution for racketeering, money laundering, and systematic property theft. Oliver, your discovery of this unauthorized development led us to a criminal network that's stolen over $47 million in property and defrauded hundreds of innocent home buyers, Agent Chen explained, while reviewing evidence that filled 3 conference rooms. Karen Whitmore wasn't just an HOA president gone rogue. She was running organized crime disguised as real estate development. The scope of the investigation was staggering. Federal agents had identified 23 co-conspirators across 6 states, including county officials, real estate agents, contractors, and financial institutions that had knowingly participated in Karen's property theft schemes. The evidence against Karen personally was overwhelming and devastating. FBI forensic accountants had traced every dollar of her criminal profits, from the falsified permits that authorized construction on Dua's land, to the shell companies that laundered proceeds from previous property theft operations. She's been operating this scheme for 8 years, Agent Chen continued, pointing to financial flowcharts that mapped Karen's criminal enterprise. Systematic targeting of celebrity and wealthy property owners, corruption of local government officials, and sophisticated document fraud that created fake legitimacy for massive unauthorized construction projects. But the investigation had revealed something even more disturbing than individual property theft. Karen had been teaching her criminal methods to other HOA presidents and property managers through what she called advanced community development seminars. The seminars, advertised as continuing education for community management professionals, were actually criminal training sessions, where Karen shared techniques for falsifying permits, corrupting government officials, and identifying vulnerable properties owned by absentee investors. We have undercover recordings of Karen explaining how to research celebrity travel schedules to identify optimal theft opportunities, Agent Chen said, playing audio that would become key evidence in the federal prosecution. She's created a manual for systematic property theft that treats stealing land like a business model. The recordings were damning beyond anything prosecutors had hoped to obtain. Karen's own voice explaining criminal techniques to other community managers provided perfect evidence of criminal intent and conspiracy. The key is finding property owners who travel frequently or who bought land as investment rather than residence, Karen's voice explained during one recorded seminar. Celebrities are perfect targets because they're often overseas for months at a time, and they hire property managers who don't visit regularly enough to notice construction activity. The seminars had generated over $340,000 in revenue for Karen, while spreading her criminal methods to community managers across the western United States. Federal investigators had identified at least 12 property theft schemes directly inspired by Karen's criminal training. But perhaps most shocking was the discovery that Karen had been systematically researching potential targets using social media, travel websites, and entertainment industry publications to identify celebrities who owned remote properties they didn't actively monitor. She had files on over 200 potential targets, Agent Chen revealed, showing us organized dossiers that read like intelligence reports compiled by a professional stalker. Detailed analysis of property ownership, travel schedules, security arrangements, and legal representation for everyone from movie stars to tech executives. Karen had been monitoring her tour schedules, social media posts, and real estate transactions for 2 years before purchasing the Marin County property. The theft of Dua's land wasn't opportunistic crime. It was carefully planned targeting that had begun before Dua even decided to buy the property. She knew about Dua's interest in the property before the sale was completed, I said, reviewing documents that showed Karen had corrupted county officials and prepared fraudulent permits months in advance. This entire development was planned as soon as Dua expressed interest in buying wilderness land in Marin County. The level of premeditation elevated the charges from property theft to organized stalking and conspiracy that carried federal mandatory minimum sentences. Karen had essentially operated a criminal intelligence network that researched and targeted wealthy individuals for systematic property theft. Meanwhile, the media coverage had transformed from local property dispute to national story about celebrity stalking and organized crime targeting high-profile individuals. CNN, Fox News, and entertainment networks provided daily updates on what legal commentators called the most audacious property theft in American history. The coverage focused on both the criminal sophistication of Karen's operation and Dua's graceful response to discovering that her private retreat had been stolen and developed without her knowledge. Entertainment reporters contrasted Karen's criminal arrogance with Dua's commitment to protecting innocent families who'd been victimized by the same fraud scheme. But the story that generated the most public outrage came from investigative journalists who'd uncovered the full scope of Karen's targeting of celebrities and wealthy individuals. The systematic nature of her research and the calculated way she'd exploited their travel schedules and privacy needs revealed a predator who'd turned celebrity stalking into profitable criminal enterprise. Rolling Stone published a comprehensive investigation titled The HOA Predator: How One Woman Built a Criminal Empire by Stealing Celebrity Property. The article included excerpts from Karen's targeting files and recorded training seminars that showed the methodical way she'd researched and victimized high-profile individuals. Karen Whitmore didn't just steal property, the Rolling Stone investigation concluded. She created a criminal industry that turned celebrity privacy and success into vulnerability that could be exploited for massive financial gain. The article sparked congressional hearings on celebrity privacy protection and the regulation of HOA authority that could be abused for criminal purposes. Federal legislators introduced bills requiring background checks for community management professionals and federal oversight of large-scale residential development projects. But for Dua, the most important development was the progress toward helping innocent families recover from Karen's fraud. The Legal Defense Fund had grown to $4.7 million through donations from supporters who recognized the importance of protecting both property owners and homebuyers from systematic criminal fraud. Every family who purchased homes on our stolen property will receive full compensation for their losses, Dua announced during a press conference at the unauthorized development site. Karen Whitmore's crimes created victims on both sides: property owners whose land was stolen and families who unknowingly bought fraudulent properties. Standing in front of the homes that had been built on her stolen land, Dua outlined a comprehensive victim assistance program that would provide legal representation, financial counseling, and relocation assistance for affected families, while pursuing maximum restitution from Karen's criminal network. These families invested their life savings in what they believed were legitimate dream homes, Dua continued, her voice carrying the compassion that had made her a beloved global figure. The solution isn't punishing them for Karen's crimes. It's ensuring they receive justice and protection from future victimization. The Victim Assistance Program became a model for protecting innocent parties caught in complex fraud schemes. Legal experts praised Dua's approach as both financially sound and socially responsible, demonstrating how celebrity platforms could be used to advance justice rather than simply pursue personal vindication. But Karen's response to the federal investigation revealed the depth of her criminal psychology and complete lack of remorse for the destruction she'd caused. Rather than cooperating with investigators or attempting to minimize her sentence through plea negotiations, she escalated to what prosecutors termed desperate criminal obstruction. Federal agents discovered Karen had been attempting to destroy evidence, intimidate witnesses, and coordinate false testimony from co-conspirators facing their own criminal charges. She'd hired private investigators to research federal prosecutors and FBI agents, looking for personal information that could be used for blackmail or intimidation. She's treating federal prosecution like an HOA dispute that can be won through harassment and bureaucratic manipulation, Agent Chen observed after Karen's latest obstruction attempt. She doesn't understand that federal criminal law doesn't work like community association bylaws. The obstruction charges added additional mandatory minimum sentences to Karen's already devastating legal situation. Federal prosecutors now had evidence of ongoing criminal behavior that demonstrated she posed a continuing danger to both victims and the legal system itself. Judge Patricia Morrison, the federal district judge assigned to Karen's case, revoked her bail after the intimidation attempts and ordered her held in federal custody pending trial. The woman who'd once ruled multiple communities through fear and bureaucratic intimidation was now confined to a jail cell where her authority extended exactly nowhere. Ms. Whitmore, Judge Morrison declared during the bail revocation hearing, "Your continued criminal behavior while facing federal prosecution demonstrates that you pose an ongoing danger to both potential witnesses and the integrity of these proceedings. You will remain in federal custody until your trial concludes." The bail revocation was carried live on court TV and generated immediate social media celebration from victims of Karen's various schemes. The hashtag Karen in jail trended nationally as families she'd harassed across multiple states shared their stories of finally seeing accountability for systematic community abuse. But perhaps most satisfying was the reaction from residents of the legitimate Hillcrest Estates community, where Karen had served as HOA president. Property values that had plummeted due to association with her criminal activities began recovering as news coverage emphasized their status as victims rather than accomplices. "We had no idea our HOA president was operating criminal schemes," explained longtime resident Maria Santos during a community meeting to elect new leadership. "She ruled through intimidation and financial manipulation that we now understand was preparing us to accept criminal behavior as normal community management." The community voted unanimously to rename their development Hillcrest Gardens and implement transparent financial reporting, democratic governance, and resident protection measures designed to prevent future abuse of HOA authority. 3 weeks before Karen's trial was scheduled to begin, federal prosecutors achieved the breakthrough that would guarantee her life sentence and complete destruction of her criminal network. Karen's brother-in-law, facing 25 years for conspiracy and money laundering, agreed to provide complete cooperation in exchange for reduced charges. His testimony revealed the full scope of Karen's criminal planning, including detailed records of property research, victim targeting, and profit distribution among co-conspirators. Most damaging, he provided recordings of Karen explicitly discussing the criminal nature of her activities and her contempt for both property owners and innocent homebuyers she'd victimized. Karen always said that rich people and celebrities deserved to be stolen from because they had more than they needed, he testified during his cooperation interview. She saw property theft as redistribution rather than crime, and she enjoyed the power that came from destroying people's financial security. The recordings confirmed what prosecutors had suspected about Karen's psychological motivation. She wasn't just stealing property for financial gain, she was conducting systematic warfare against success and wealth that she envied but couldn't achieve legitimately. Her targeting of Dua specifically had been motivated by resentment of a young woman who'd achieved global success through talent and hard work. Karen's criminal enterprise was powered by hatred of achievement that made her own failures seem more significant by comparison. The trial was scheduled to begin in 3 weeks, but federal prosecutors were confident that Karen would receive the maximum sentence under federal guidelines. The evidence was overwhelming, the victim impact was substantial, and the deterrent value of harsh punishment would protect future potential targets from similar schemes. For Dua, justice was finally within reach, but more importantly, the systematic exposure of Karen's criminal methods would protect other celebrities and wealthy individuals from similar targeting, while ensuring that innocent families received full compensation for their victimization. The woman in the white tennis outfit who'd built 98 homes on stolen property was about to discover that federal prison jumpsuits came in a much less flattering color. 8 months after federal marshals arrested Karen Whitmore at her country club tennis match, I sat in the packed federal courthouse watching the woman who'd stolen Dua's property face the consequences of her criminal empire. The trial of United States v. Karen Whitmore had become the most closely watched property fraud case in American history, with court TV providing gavel-to-gavel coverage of proceedings that would set legal precedents for decades. Judge Patricia Morrison presided over a courtroom packed beyond capacity with media representatives, legal observers, and families from across the country who'd been victimized by Karen's systematic property theft schemes. The evidence against her filled 4 bankers' boxes and included financial records, recorded conversations, and testimony from co-conspirators who'd agreed to cooperate rather than face life sentences themselves. Federal prosecutor David Martinez opened the government's case with a presentation that transformed complex financial crimes into a clear narrative of systematic greed and calculated victimization. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, the defendant didn't just steal property, she built a criminal enterprise that targeted successful individuals because she believed their achievements made them deserving of victimization. Financial experts testified about money laundering schemes that had processed over $47 million in criminal proceeds. Former co-conspirators described Karen's criminal training seminars where she taught other community managers how to steal property through falsified permits and corrupted government officials. But the testimony that defined the trial's moral center came from the families Karen had targeted. Rosa Martinez, whose family had lost their generational ranch to one of Karen's earlier schemes, described years of harassment that culminated in forced sale of property they'd owned for 60 years. She told us our ranch didn't fit the community's vision, Mrs. Martinez testified, her voice breaking with emotion. 40 years we raised cattle on that land. She destroyed our family's legacy because she decided Hispanic ranchers didn't belong in her idea of proper development. The pattern of targeting was undeniable and deeply disturbing. Karen had systematically researched and victimized families based on race, celebrity status, and perceived vulnerability to bureaucratic harassment. Her criminal files contained detailed psychological profiles of potential targets that read like intelligence dossiers compiled by a professional predator. Miguel Santos, whose tech startup fortune had made him a target for Karen's property theft, testified about losing his family's vacation home to a scheme identical to what she'd attempted against Dua. She researched my travel schedule, my children's school activities, even my wife's medical appointments to identify optimal timing for her fraudulent construction. But the most powerful testimony came from Dua herself. Taking the witness stand with the same composure she'd shown during global stadium performances, Dua described discovering that 98 luxury homes had been built on her private wilderness retreat without her knowledge or permission. I purchased 847 acres specifically to preserve wilderness character and create a private space for writing music, Dua testified, her British accent carrying clearly through the packed courtroom. The defendant systematically researched my tour schedule and property management arrangements to ensure her theft would proceed undetected for as long as possible. Under cross-examination, Karen's defense attorney attempted to portray the unauthorized construction as a misunderstanding based on conflicting property surveys. The strategy collapsed when Dua calmly explained the extensive due diligence she'd conducted before purchasing the property. "Sir, I hired surveyors, title companies, and environmental consultants to verify every aspect of this property purchase," Dua responded, turning the cross-examination into an exposition of Karen's criminal methodology. The defendant's fraudulent permits were based on surveys that had been digitally altered to eliminate my property from county records. The defense case was weak and poorly coordinated. Karen's attorney, clearly overwhelmed by the scope of federal evidence, attempted to portray her as a dedicated community manager who'd made errors in judgment rather than committed systematic crimes. The argument fell apart when prosecutors played recorded conversations where Karen had explicitly described her criminal targeting methods and her contempt for both property owners and innocent homebuyers she'd victimized. "Rich people deserve what happens to them," Karen's voice explained during one particularly damaging recording. "They buy property they don't need and don't monitor. We're just redistributing resources to families who will actually use the land productively." But the most devastating evidence came from Karen's own financial records. FBI forensic accountants had traced every dollar of her criminal profits, revealing a lifestyle funded entirely through systematic theft and fraud. The luxury cars, designer clothing, country club memberships, and private school tuition for her children had all been purchased using money stolen from communities she'd managed and properties she'd developed without authorization. Her entire adult life had been financed through criminal enterprise disguised as legitimate business activity. The defendant lived like royalty, using money she stole from families who trusted her with their life savings. Prosecutor Martinez told the jury during closing arguments, "Every luxury she enjoyed was purchased with someone else's financial security." The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all federal charges: racketeering, conspiracy, mail fraud, wire fraud, money laundering, and civil rights violations. The unanimous verdicts reflected overwhelming evidence of systematic criminal enterprise that had operated for nearly a decade. But the financial destruction of Karen's criminal network extended far beyond individual prison sentences. Federal asset forfeiture had seized every property, bank account, and luxury item purchased with criminal proceeds. The beach house in Malibu, the designer car collection, the country club memberships, everything was being liquidated to compensate victims. The forfeiture process revealed the true scope of Karen's lifestyle inflation funded by criminal activity. She'd been spending over $400,000 annually on luxury items while reporting legitimate income of less than $80,000 from community management fees. The mathematical impossibility of her lifestyle had been sustained entirely through systematic theft. Every victim will receive full restitution from the defendant's seized assets, the federal victim advocate explained during a post-conviction meeting with affected families. The luxury lifestyle she built through crime will now fund recovery for everyone she victimized. But perhaps most satisfying was the collapse of Karen's carefully constructed social status. The country club that had been the center of her social life revoked her membership and banned her from the premises. Former friends avoided her calls and deleted her from social media connections. The social media coverage of her conviction became a viral phenomenon that transformed her into a symbol of suburban entitlement and criminal arrogance. The hashtag HOA Karen Convicted generated over 50 million views as users shared stories of similar community abuse and celebrated accountability for systematic harassment. TikTok exploded with videos analyzing Karen's courtroom demeanor, her failed defense strategies, and the contrast between her criminal lifestyle and the families she'd victimized. The most viral content showed side-by-side comparisons of Karen's luxury spending with the financial devastation experienced by her victims. Twitter became a platform for legal experts explaining the significance of the conviction for future property fraud prevention, while victims' rights advocates used the case to highlight the importance of protecting both property owners and innocent buyers from systematic fraud schemes. Judge Morrison scheduled sentencing for the following month, but federal guidelines suggested Karen would receive the maximum penalty: life imprisonment without possibility of parole under the federal 3 strikes provision that applied to her multiple racketeering convictions. Ms. Whitmore, Judge Morrison said during the post-conviction hearing, "You have been found guilty of operating a criminal enterprise that victimized dozens of families and stole millions of dollars in property. The evidence shows systematic targeting of individuals based on their success, celebrity status, and perceived vulnerability to bureaucratic harassment." The preliminary sentencing evaluation confirmed what prosecutors had expected. Karen's criminal history, the scope of her schemes, and her continued obstruction during trial had eliminated any possibility of reduced sentences or early release. But for Dua, the conviction represented validation of her decision to fight rather than settle. The global media attention surrounding the case had exposed systematic vulnerabilities in property protection and community governance that would benefit future potential victims. "This case isn't just about recovering my stolen property," Dua said during a post-conviction press conference. "It's about protecting everyone from criminals who exploit community authority and government corruption to victimize successful individuals." The legislative impact was immediate and substantial. Congress passed the Celebrity Property Protection Act requiring federal background checks for community managers and mandatory reporting of large-scale residential construction projects. State legislatures across the country implemented similar protections based on lessons learned from Karen's criminal methodology. Most importantly for affected families, the Victim Compensation Fund had grown to over $8 million through asset forfeiture and donations from supporters who recognized the importance of protecting both property owners and home buyers from systematic fraud. Every family will receive full compensation plus additional damages for the emotional trauma and financial disruption caused by Karen's crimes, the victim advocate announced. Her criminal empire will be completely liquidated to fund recovery for everyone she hurt. The final irony came when Karen's own attorney requested permission to withdraw from representing her after she attempted to blame him for her conviction and threatened to file complaints against him for ineffective assistance. Even her legal representation wanted nothing to do with her continuing criminal psychology. 2 weeks before sentencing, Karen made one final attempt to avoid accountability by offering to cooperate with federal investigators pursuing other property fraud schemes. Federal prosecutors rejected the offer, noting that her continued dishonesty and attempts to minimize her criminal responsibility made her worthless as a cooperating witness. The defendant has shown no genuine remorse and continues to view herself as a victim rather than a perpetrator, The prosecution's sentencing memo concluded, "She poses an ongoing danger to any community unfortunate enough to grant her authority over property or financial matters." The woman who'd once ruled multiple communities through fear and bureaucratic intimidation was now facing life imprisonment with the universal recognition that she represented everything wrong with unchecked authority and community governance. Her sentencing hearing was scheduled for the following week, but the outcome was predetermined. Karen Whitmore would spend the rest of her life in federal prison, while her victims rebuilt their lives using compensation funded by the liquidation of her criminal empire. Justice was finally being served with interest compounded by complete financial destruction and social exile. The woman in the white tennis outfit had discovered that federal prison uniforms came in a much less flattering shade of orange. 3 weeks after Karen Whitmore's federal conviction, I stood beside Dua in Judge Patricia Morrison's courtroom for what would become the most satisfying sentencing hearing in property fraud history. The woman who'd stolen 847 acres and built an unauthorized neighborhood worth $240 million was about to discover that federal justice carried consequences she'd never imagined. The courtroom was packed beyond capacity with victims, media representatives, and legal observers who'd followed the case from property dispute to organized crime prosecution. Karen sat at the defendant's table in her orange federal jumpsuit, the pristine white tennis outfit replaced by prison attire that reflected her new reality as a convicted felon facing life imprisonment. Judge Morrison had reviewed the pre-sentencing investigation, victim impact statements, and federal guidelines that would determine Karen's fate. The evidence was overwhelming: systematic property theft across 14 states, criminal enterprise spanning 8 years, and complete lack of remorse that made her an ongoing danger to any community. "Ms. Whitmore," Judge Morrison began, her voice carrying the authority of federal justice, "you have been convicted of operating a criminal enterprise that targeted successful individuals for systematic property theft and financial exploitation. The evidence shows calculated victimization based on celebrity status, wealth, and perceived vulnerability to bureaucratic harassment. The victim impact statements had been devastating. 47 families testified about losing homes, life savings, and financial security to Karen's various schemes. Elderly couples forced from generational properties, young families bankrupted by fraudulent fines, celebrities stalked and researched for optimal theft opportunities. But the statement that captured the moral center of Karen's crimes came from Dua herself. Standing at the podium with the same composure she'd shown throughout the ordeal, Dua addressed both the court and the broader implications of systematic property fraud. "Your Honor, the defendant didn't just steal my property, she stole my sense of security and privacy that attracted me to America as a place where success is celebrated rather than targeted," Dua testified, her voice carrying the dignity that had made her a global icon. Her crimes represent everything wrong with authority that's abused for personal gain rather than community service. Dua's final words captured the broader significance of the case. "I ask not for revenge but for justice that protects other families from experiencing what we endured. No one should fear that their success or celebrity status makes them targets for systematic criminal harassment." The financial analysis presented during sentencing revealed the staggering scope of Karen's criminal profits. Over $47 million stolen through property theft, embezzlement, and fraud schemes that had operated like legitimate business enterprises. Her luxury lifestyle had been funded entirely through systematic victimization of families who trusted her with community authority. The defendant lived like royalty, using money stolen from families who believed she was protecting their investments. Prosecutor Martinez told the court, "Every luxury she enjoyed was purchased with someone else's financial devastation." Federal asset forfeiture had seized everything: the Malibu beach house, designer car collection, country club memberships, and Swiss bank accounts that had hidden criminal proceeds. The total recovery exceeded $52 million, ensuring full restitution for every victim plus punitive damages for the emotional trauma and financial disruption she'd caused. Judge Morrison's sentencing reflected both the severity of Karen's crimes and the need to deter similar systematic fraud targeting high-profile individuals. "Ms. Whitmore, your criminal enterprise represents the worst abuse of community authority and government corruption. You targeted families based on their success and vulnerability, showing complete contempt for both property rights and human dignity." The sentence was swift and final: life imprisonment without possibility of parole under federal racketeering guidelines, plus consecutive sentences for money laundering, civil rights violations, and conspiracy that eliminated any hope of appeal or early release. "You will spend the remainder of your life in federal custody," Judge Morrison declared, her words echoing through the packed courtroom. Your criminal empire will be completely liquidated to compensate victims, while your conviction serves as permanent warning to others who might consider similar abuse of authority." The courtroom erupted in applause from victims and supporters, while Karen sat motionless, finally understanding the complete consequences of her systematic criminality. Federal marshals immediately escorted her from the courtroom to begin her life sentence, ending her reign of suburban terrorism forever. The media coverage was immediate and overwhelming. Legal commentators hailed the sentence as landmark accountability for systematic property fraud, while victim rights advocates celebrated the complete financial destruction of Karen's criminal network. Social media exploded with celebration from families across the country who'd experienced similar community harassment and finally witnessed ultimate accountability for HOA abuse and criminal authority. The hashtag #LifeForKaren trended globally as users shared stories of authoritarian community leaders and celebrated justice for systematic harassment. But for Dua, the victory extended far beyond individual punishment. The case had sparked federal legislation protecting celebrities and wealthy individuals from systematic targeting, while establishing legal precedents that would prevent similar fraud schemes for generations. This case changed how America protects property rights and prosecutes community fraud, Dua announced during a post-sentencing press conference. Karen's criminal empire will fund victim recovery, while her conviction protects future families from similar victimization. The legislative impact was immediate and substantial. The Celebrity Property Protection Act required federal background checks for community managers, mandatory reporting of large-scale construction projects, and criminal penalties for systematic targeting based on wealth or celebrity status. Most importantly, the Victim Compensation Fund had grown to $15.2 million through asset forfeiture, donations, and federal victim assistance programs. Every affected family received full restitution plus additional damages that exceeded their original losses. The liquidation of Karen's criminal empire will completely compensate every victim while funding legal defense programs for future community abuse cases, the federal victim advocate announced. Her systematic theft has been transformed into systematic justice. The transformation of the stolen property itself became a model for positive community development. Dua purchased the 98 unauthorized homes from innocent buyers at fair market value, then converted the development into affordable workforce housing for Marin County families. These homes exist because of criminal fraud, but they can serve legitimate community needs, Dewey explained during the conversion announcement. Instead of destruction, we're creating opportunity for working families while ensuring no one profits from criminal behavior. The Dua Lipa Community Housing Project became a showcase for sustainable development and community inclusion. The unauthorized luxury homes were modified for affordability while preserving the wilderness character that had attracted Dua to the property originally. Solar panels, community gardens, and hiking trails transformed Karen's criminal development into an environmentally sustainable community that served working families rather than wealthy investors. The monthly housing costs were 40% below market rate, funded by the criminal asset forfeiture that had seized Karen's criminal profits. But perhaps the most beautiful outcome was the complete restoration of Dua's original vision for the property. The 749 acres not used for affordable housing remained pristine wilderness where she could write music surrounded by nature, while the community housing provided security and caretaking that enhanced rather than disrupted the natural environment. Karen tried to steal my wilderness retreat and turn it into luxury development, Dua reflected during the first community barbecue for the affordable housing residents. Instead, her crimes created affordable housing that protects the wilderness while serving families who couldn't otherwise afford to live in Marin County. The annual Dua Lipa Community Festival became a celebration of justice, transformed into community service. Local musicians performed in the amphitheater built where Karen's fraudulent sales office had operated, while affordable housing families shared the wilderness trails that had been preserved through criminal asset forfeiture. Children who might never have experienced pristine California wilderness now explored hiking trails and learned about environmental conservation in their own backyard. The criminal development that was supposed to exclude working families had instead created opportunities that would benefit them for generations. 6 months after sentencing, I received a letter that perfectly captured the transformation Karen's crimes had ultimately achieved. Written by Maria Santos, whose family had been among the first to move into the affordable housing community. Mr. Reed, our children wake up every morning in a beautiful home surrounded by wilderness we could never have afforded without Ms. Lipa's generosity. The woman who tried to steal this land for wealthy investors accidentally created opportunities for working families like ours. justice sometimes works in mysterious ways. The letter concluded with gratitude that extended beyond housing to the broader lesson about standing up to systematic abuse. Thank you for fighting that woman when she tried to intimidate you. Your courage to report her crimes protected our family and hundreds of others from continued victimization. Today, 3 years after discovering 98 unauthorized homes on Dua's stolen property, I drive through the community Karen's crimes accidentally created and marvel at how justice can transform criminal destruction into lasting community benefit. The homes are filled with working families whose children attend excellent schools and explore wilderness trails. The community center hosts educational programs about property rights and fraud prevention. The organic gardens produce food for local food banks while teaching sustainable agriculture. Karen Whitmore spends her days in federal maximum security prison, her criminal empire completely liquidated and her authority extending exactly nowhere. The woman who'd ruled communities through fear and intimidation now faces the absolute powerlessness of life imprisonment. But Dua's property thrives with the kind of authentic community spirit that no HOA regulation could manufacture. Success is celebrated rather than regulated. Diversity is welcomed rather than excluded. Achievement is shared rather than hidden. The World Cup trophy that had caused so much controversy in our previous neighborhood dispute would have fit perfectly in this community that celebrates rather than suppresses accomplishment. But that story belongs to a different Karen, in a different community, with a different celebrity who'd chosen dignity over destruction. This Karen had chosen criminal enterprise over community service, and she'd discovered that federal justice carries consequences that last longer than life sentences. Her story serves as permanent warning to anyone who might consider using authority to victimize rather than protect the people they're supposed to serve. The wilderness she'd tried to steal continues to inspire music that reaches audiences around the world. The families she'd tried to exclude now call it home. The criminal empire she'd built to fund luxury has instead funded justice and community inclusion. Sometimes the most beautiful victories come not from defeating enemies, but from transforming their destruction into something that serves the greater good for generations to come.